I'm Tommy Thomason, and I'm director of the Texas Center for Community Journalism. Recently, the center hosted a workshop on investigative reporting for community newspapers, featuring Mark Horvit, who is Executive Director of Investigative Reporters and Editors. We've asked Mark to share parts of that workshop with you. In this first video, Mark talks about developing a document state of mind.
The key to being a successful journalist is so often comes down to state of mind. At my organization, Investigative Reporters and Editors, one of the things we preach is having a document state of mind. And what we mean by that is that it's not enough as a reporter to go to sources and ask them what they think or ask for their opinions, but the key is to make them back that up with documentation and facts. So approach every story that you're doing with that document state of mind. With that in mind, there are some key things that you should always try to get, depending on the beat you're on, documents that will help you be a better reporter and stay on top of the topics that you're covering. For any beat that you cover, be it City Hall, school district, county government, you should try them. There are several financial documents that are very important to have. One of them, obviously, is the budget. It's important to try to get the budget for at least 3 years. The reason for that is one of the things you're looking for when you're looking at financial documents are change. You're looking for departments or areas that have increased or decreased substantially over time. What's the reason for that? Are they padding the budget somewhere? Did they significantly cut something somewhere? You can't see those patterns if you don't have the information over time. When you're asking for information and you're asking for the budget, I would recommend always asking for that information electronically in addition to a printout. One reason for that is that, first of all, it can be cheaper to get information that way. You don't have to pay for copies if they're giving it to you electronically. Just as importantly, it's easier to sift through, it's easier to search for key words, and if you have financial figures, for example, if you can take those figures, you can manipulate them yourself. For example, you can put them in an Excel spreadsheet, you can do some basic addition and subtraction, you can look for percentages change. I know math is scary for journalists, but I promise this isn't that bad. And it can make a big difference to your effectiveness. Another key document to try to get for any agency you cover is the audit. Every public agency is audited typically by an outside independent auditor. You should get the audit for 3 years in the same way you get the budget for 3 years, but just asking for the audit's not enough. You also want to ask for the management letter. Here's why. A typical audit will be, unless you're an accountant, it's pretty hard sometimes to look at rows and rows of numbers and pages of figures and make heads or tails of it. But the management letter is a document that the auditing firm writes to the city manager typically, or to the mayor, and what it does is it lays out what they see as key problems, key shortcomings, key areas where there could be financial mismanagement or problems within an organization. That document can be written pretty straightforward and can often be pretty critical and can be pretty easy to understand even if you're not an accountant. But that document does not come attached to the audit typically. So if you just request the audit from an organization, they're not going to give it to you for probably obvious reasons. It is, however, a public document, and you should always make sure you ask for it. Similarly, when you're looking through an audit, just as important, if not more important than the rows and rows of numbers, are the footnotes at the bottom of the page. Once again, oftentimes the more pointed or critical comments tend to come in those footnotes at the bottom. One thing to keep in mind is that an auditing firm, it's independent and they're going to do a good job, but they're also paid for typically by the agency they're auditing. So they tend to not, the audit structure tends not to scream negative things just staring at the numbers. So it's important to think about looking for those footnotes and making sure you request that management letter. Another document that can be crucial to covering any agency is knowing how to deal with property records. Depending on the size county you're in, those might be available online or electronically, or you may have to go down to the tax collector, to the property recorder's office and get those documents on paper. Property records are key to understanding who has power in a community. Just like the old phrase, follow the money, nothing tracks that more than who owns the property and who owns the land in a community. So it's important, for example, to take all the public officials you cover, or anybody who's in a position of great influence, and figure out, what do they own? How much money, how much property do they own? How much is it worth? Where is it? For example, if the public body is voting on putting in a new store somewhere or a new facility, who owns that property? Who owns the property near it? Who owns the property on what's going to become an important new intersection that right now is just a pasture or a field? That can be key to understanding the motivation behind the way people are voting. Also, it's good to know how much property taxes are the people who are elected paying. How much is their property assessed? There have been many, many cases around the country of cases where the mayor, the county commissioner, the head of the school board, for some magical reason, their house is valued significantly lower than all the other homes around it. Why would they do that? Because the amount of property tax you pay is based on the value assessed to your house, the value appraised for your house. The lower that appraisal, the lower the taxes that you pay. And you would think that's such an obvious trick that most people wouldn't use it, but I'm telling you that again and again you find in communities around the country, people do it. Why? Money. Typically, you also want to take a look and see, so their assessed property taxes, are they actually paying them? A surprising number of people either in office or running for office don't keep up and pay their property taxes or other taxes they owe the government. And it seems like a pretty safe baseline that if you're going to be elected to a position where you can tax people, you at least ought to be paying those taxes. It seems fair, but most journalists don't think to look. Once again, it's approaching things with that document state of mind. What numbers are there out there that I can look at that can help make sense to people's motivations or the way they're thinking or acting? If you have nonprofit organizations in your community, and just about everybody does, many people think those are untouchable by journalists because they don't have to file, you can't just go and request their budgets and other documents. Well, you can't, but you can usually get something even better. Every nonprofit for which donations are tax deductible, that's a 501c3 tax designation, and that's the vast majority of nonprofit organizations, has to file a document with the IRS called a 990. That's the equivalent of an income tax report to you and me. That 990 report is a public document, and they have to keep the most recent 990 they have on premises at all times and must make it available to anybody who asks. That's federal law. But you don't even have to do that. There are a couple of websites that are free to sign up for, which take those 990s from all over the country, scan them in, and make them available to any member of the public who wants to see them. GuideStar is one that many journalists use. You can go to the website, it's just guidestar.org. Sign up, create your own password, and instantly you have access to the 990s of every nonprofit organization around the country. Why does that matter? Well, the 990 contains some really, really important information for judging the effectiveness of a nonprofit and whether it's filling its mission. You can find out how much they pay their top employees, which is crucial. You can find out how much they're dedicating to what they state is their mission. If their mission is feeding the hungry, how much of their money goes to feeding the hungry versus paying for salaries or paying for vehicles or other things. That's spelled out in the 990. So you don't have to be an accountant to understand these documents. They're pretty simple, and once you get used to reading them, everything's in the same place every time. So once you know where to look, for example, for the top salaries, you're always going to be able to find it. You can always look to see how much did they take in a year? How much did they spend? That can be another important thing. Oftentimes you might have an organization in your community, say a food bank, which is in financial dire straits and perhaps is spending more than it takes in. If that organization is not financially healthy, that can be crucially important for your community, and they also might be taking more donations in at a time when they shouldn't be because they know they're not going to be able to sustain themselves. Again, something else you can find from the 990. You have to remember as a journalist that if you don't do this in your community, especially in smaller communities, nobody else is going to do it. It's incumbent on you to be the watchdog of these nonprofits, of these government organizations, of everybody who's taking money from the public, whether it's tax money, donations, in any form. If you're not keeping them honest and holding them accountable for what they're doing, nobody else will, and that's a shame.